Now the Jews will say, the Muslims put themselves in public, but the Jews say, well, no, we don't acknowledge the New Testament. We don't. So therefore, but then the Hebrew Bible is part of the Christian canon, but the New Testament isn't part of the Hebrew or the Judaic canon.
Can I interrupt one thing?
Yeah, please.
When you speak of Jews, I would say
Israelites, Hebrews.
My distinction was this.
Okay.
There's the Jews of the Old Testament up to the time of Jesus. Okay. They're one thing.
Okay.
Then there are those who've called themselves Jews since the time of Jesus, after the temple was destroyed.
Right.
They use the same name, but I think they're a different religion.
Is there a word? Okay.
So I have to say, maybe it would help our distinctions to say Israelites for the Bible people and Jews for the modern people. It just, when we're just talking, otherwise we get kind of like confusion. There's two different religions, but when we talk about Jews there.
So two different religions?
Because the Jews
are the names of
Jews, and we easily do it because people call themselves Jews who are ethnically from a certain group today.
That's right.
And they identify themselves with Moses and so on. But that's not right to do that because there are two different religions. Oh. Now they might say, yes, we are Moses' people, but that has to be argued about.
Abraham, they call it?
Yeah, but it has to be argued that they are to be identified with those people.
Okay.
So there's two distinct religions: modern Judaism and Old Testament Judaism, Catholicism, and the other religions.
But do they have the same scriptures?
The modern Jews don't. You see, that's it. The modern Jews don't have the New Testament. They have the same Bible in a sense as the Israelites had,
the Torah,
but not quite.
Right.
Because you see, some of those Old Testament Jews accepted some books which modern Jews don't accept. For example, the two books of Maccabees, the book of Judith, the book of Baruch.
Right.
And parts of Daniel.
They call that the word apocrypha, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Right. And so the Jews had not defined what was their Old Testament at the time of Jesus. They came to a definition of it centuries afterwards.
So how did these two, sects, factions or denominations, Muslim Christian, how did they see each other within that broad thing, what we call Judaism, now, to the outsider?
So when you say which two do you mean? The Israelites of old
the
and
Israelites and what would you?
The Jews of today?
And the Jews of today, we call them what? The Israelites and the Jews?
I don't mind, as long as we have two different words.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the Jews of today, if they regard themselves strongly Orthodox, they'll identify themselves with the Hebrews of the Old Testament. I would say they can't, because there are ethnic questions of genetic identity.
Okay.
And then there are religious questions. Since they don't have a temple today, they don't sacrifice animals today, yet that was all required under the Old Testament religion.
But they were expelled, weren't they, from their the land of Canaan?
Yes, but until they go back to what they were doing in the Old Testament, they can't say my religion is the same as that religion. Because God has specific demands in the Old Testament, and they're not fulfilling them. They've got their prayers, and they've also, these modern Jews, they've got all kinds of extra practices and beliefs which weren't known in the Old Testament. They say they were known because they weren't written down. They're called
talking about things like the Zophar, the Kabbalah?
Part of it. But these modern Jews say Moses got the written law, which is in the Old Testament, but he also got the oral law, which was not written down, but was transmitted from the time of Moses all the way up to the time of the modern Jews.
So who's it transmitted to from Yahweh?
From Yahweh, from Moses to the rabbis.
Did the Israelites and, should we say, modern, do they both call their deity Yahweh?
Yes, they do. Or they use the term Hashem as well.
Hashem.
And there may be other names that I don't know about. But what matters is...
Adonis or Adonai.
Adonai, that's okay as a term, that's biblical as well. But if you take the oral law, they say that it gets handed down from Moses to the rabbis and so on.
And gets imparted to Moses by
God at Sinai.
As I said, God's sort of a generic word.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So they would say... by Yahweh?
Yes, that's right. All the way down from the rabbis to the Talmud, when it got written down.
Okay.
And so they are not. I would say it's confusing to call them Jews. It's best to call them Jews who believe in the Talmud, or Talmudic Jews, or rabbinic Jews, just to distinguish them from these guys.
Unless people don't know about these differences.
Yeah, because one could say, to be fair to them, one could say, well, I believe you that Moses did have an oral law. but you've got to prove it. And if they don't prove it, they can't say their religion of Jews today is the same as the religion of the Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and all those guys in the Old Testament. My view is on an objective standpoint, these Jews are not the same religion as the Jews of the Old Testament, and they're racially a bit different.
Well, we have the Ashkenazi. I can't see any genetic link back to... I mean, Palestinians, they're Semites, Arabs are Semites. I can't see the Ashkenazi. An anthropological classification being descending from the lands of Canaan or Israel or whatever one calls it.
What seems to have happened is that with the fall of Israel in the Jewish War 66 to 73, a lot of people went into exile. Then there's another war again in 13 to 135 thereabouts, and then a huge number leave. They go to southern Italy, a lot of them. They then intermarry with Italian women. They move north. A lot of them end up in North Germany. More intermarriage takes place. They then migrate east, and they end up in the Pale of the Settlements. In what is
so they married a woman who weren't Jewish.
Yeah, because after all,
so therefore they say I've seen that they say they define being Jewish as descended on the maternal matrilineal line.
Oh yeah,
that's. But then, as you say, historically, and you can't transmit culture through genes. You can do particular physical features.
Yeah.
So I can't. Yeah.
So what it means is this idea of transmission through the mother. Well, in the Old Testament, it's transmitted through the father. But you see, they develop their doctrines as time goes on about the matrilineal line. But the fact that they end up in Eastern Europe after a lot of intermingling with non-Jews means that their claim to being Jews may be no stronger, may be much weaker than those who've historically lived in that land for the past 2,000 years, who do not call themselves Jews now. The Palestinians, not the ones who migrated for work with the Israelis when they came there to build factories and so on, but the ones who've historically lived in that territory and call themselves Muslims and Arabs, they actually may be ethnically the Jews.
So
of the old days.
When the temple fell and they got occupied by Rome, I don't know the history, but some of those Jews may have intermarried with some of the existing non-Jews, the Canaanites. Is that possible?
Oh, exactly.
They followed idol worship at some period.
Yes. Now, what seems to be the case is that when genetic studies are done on the Ashkenazi, they find there are some genetic markers that point to the Middle East. But that doesn't mean...
You could say that you could take a lot of people, you could find a genetic marker going back in time to that region.
Fair enough. What I was going to say, though, is that just because you find a genetic marker in the Middle East, it doesn't mean the Jews of the Middle East. It could be other groups like the Carthaginians, the Phoenicians, who were Carthaginians,
Phoenicians,
and so on.
Semites, weren't they? In Hebrew was associated with Phoenician language.
So there are loads of Semites. So it doesn't necessarily go back just because there's a genetic marker. Doesn't mean it goes back to Israel.
We say the Palestinians, the Arab people who've occupied, they are Semites. If you define it.
So it's all murky stuff.
It is very. And most people don't know it's as murky as you've surprised me what you're saying here. It's as murky as it is.
And one of the reasons we don't know is because the controllers of the media don't want us to know. And who controls the media?
But there again, the Palestinians are descended from Semites.
Yes.
By Semitic, by classical definition.
Yeah.
And well, interesting. I'll look into this further and I'll talk to you again.
All right now.
Yeah, but interesting.
Yes, interesting stuff, isn't it? Take care.